The Chidushei Rim tells us this is because the whole miracle of Chanukah was something that was not, strictly speaking, halachically necessary. They had plenty of oil, but all the oil was tameh. They only had one jar, a pach katan, of shemen that was tahor. Problem is, you don't need tahor oil to light the menorah. You can light the menorah with tameh oil. This is the principle called tumah hutra b'tzibor. For a communal offering, you can use tumah. The Eibishter didn't have to give us a miracle at all. If the oil wouldn't have lasted, we would have lit with shemen tameh. Elamai, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, out of His love, wanted us to do the mitzvah behidor, beyond what we have to do, so we reciprocate back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu by doing the mitzvah behidor, beyond what we have to do. It's mamash mida keneged mida. The whole nace of Chanukah, or at least the nace of the Pach HaShemen, is an exemplification of hidor mitzvah. But some Sfarim point out that although it might be true that for all the other days, b'di'evet, shemen tameh would have been good, and the miracle was there for hidor mitzvah, they were mechuyev on day one to use shemen tohar. And they would not have been able to use shemen tameh if chas v'shalom they had not found a pach. And that is because, although tumah hutra b'tzibor, but when you are mechanech, when you are rededicating, when you're taking a menorah that had been desecrated, and you have to make a new menorah, and you have to start, and you're starting from the square one, you must do it with purity. And this is the emes, an important lesson to ponder. In life, there are going to be times in which there are pressures, there are stresses, there are shas hatchaks, there are b'di'evets. We all know people will have shailas, people will have difficulties. But you initially have to establish your life on the fundamental integrity of doing the Ratzon Hashem in the best possible way. Because if you start off lechatchila with the attitude that my b'di'eved will be my lechatchila, then eventually you won't be keeping the b'di'eveds either. Eventually one is going to go totally chutz l'machana. Halacha recognizes tumah hutra b'tzibur. There are times in which we have to use shemen tameh, but only when the chinuch hamenorah is b'tahara, the chinuch hamikdash is b'tahara. Then one can work within the halachic framework of sometimes compromise shas hatchak b'di'eved. And that brings me to a second point. The Gemara in Masechah Shabbos tells us that the ideal for lighting near Chanukah is you light it outside of your doorway. Again, it's machlokas if we do that today. Many people do, as you see, many people don't. But Medina de Gemara, the Ner Chanukah is to the left of your doorway, and the mezuzah is to the right of the doorway. Mezuzah biyamin, Ner Chanukah l'smal. In fact, in Sifrei Chasidus, the Nei Sasra brings, it's merumas. Parshas Miketz is almost always Shabbos Chanukah, the overwhelming majority of years. And the word Shenasayim, which is in Parshas Miketz at the beginning, can spell, Binotrikan, smile, ner tadlik. Light your ner to the left, yamin mezuzah, to the right mezuzah. What is the aside of mezuzah to the right and ner Chanukah to the left? Again, the Sfas Emes writes that in the Mishkan there are two different symbols for the Torah, the Beis HaMikdash. There is the luchais that are contained in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and they are merumas to the Torah Shebechsav. Literally, they are etched in stone, quite literally. They are immutable, they are unchangeable. There is no human input or creativity in their formulation. They are simply there. But they are mechusa, they are inaccessible. They are covered in the Aron HaKodesh. Nobody can go in there. Then we have the menorah, which, as the Rosh Yeshiva said, many Meforshim point out, is the Torah Shebal Peh. It comes from human effort. It flickers, it has different nuances, different colors, and the like. The Chidushei Rim says, or the Sfas Emes, but he quotes his grandfather in this as well, that in every Jewish house, at least Chanukah time, we have the same two symbols. The mezuzah is a miniature Aron Kodesh that has the Torah Shebechsav, the parshias of the Torah Shebechsav. The menorah is the Torah Shebal Peh. With apologies to the lefties, we normally say that the yamin is the stronger hand. The small is the left, the weaker hand. The relationship of Torah Shebal Peh is the following. And again, it's echoing what the Rosh Yeshiva said. Torah Shebaal Peh is filled with creativity, with chiddush, with human input, with our attempt to understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah and apply it to new situations, new technologies, new crises. The Torah is eternal, but we have to admit the world is ever-changing. Life is ever-changing. How do we adapt? How do we apply? How do we understand the nitzchias of Hashem's Torah to every new problem that comes down the pike, whether it's land for peace or prisoner exchange or surrogate motherhood? This is the kayach of Torah Shebaal Peh. But our ability, like a kite, to fly and soar and be machadesh is only if, like a kite, we are held, we are rooted. The yamin, the foundation, the strong point that's holding us down has to be HaKadosh Baruch Hu's expressed ratzon. And then when the mezuzahs be yamin, then we can soar with the lights of the menorah. There was another point. The Maharal points out in his very, very wonderful sefer, when you should try to look at it, the Ner Mitzvah. So many ha'aras in the sefer, so many points that the Maharal makes. But one of the points he makes is a very interesting one in terms of the time of year. He points out that Chanukah, not only the Nisim, the Milchama, but Chanukah, the date of Chanukah itself, is connected, although it's not exact because of the solar calendar, to the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. The longest night of the year appears to be a time in which darkness is getting more and more and more, longer and longer. The days are getting shorter and shorter. It seems to be that the or is going to be vanquished, the or is going to be destroyed by the choshech that keeps on going. And yet we know that precisely at the point when you have the longest night of the year, Maharal points out that is the turning point. That is when the day gets imperceptibly longer. And therefore Chanukah, besides the history of the events of the Yeshua, Chanukah, the Maharal says, is a metaphor and a mashal for the koach of or, to be miskaber over choshech. Of course, Yovan itself is called the golus of choshech. But there are many types of darkness in the world. We have the darkness of the ignorance of Torah, the darkness of Achenu B'nai Yisrael. So many are far from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is the darkness of a person's personal despair. There is the darkness of the tzaras that Am Yisrael faces. And Chanukah is a message of hope, of optimism, of faith. Faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and faith that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave each and every one of us the kochos to be able to bring light into the world. And this is a very, very important lesson. Now the concept of a yeshiva to bring people who did not have a Jewish education or Jewish background when they were younger, all right, this is pashut. Everybody does that. But a half a century ago, it was quite a bit of a chiddush. And many people had the attitude, the darkness is so overwhelming. All we can do is focus on ourselves, focus on our families, try to be the sheirus hapleta, the little bit of remnants that could survive. What are you trying to fight the choshech? It's like a drop in the ocean, whatever you do. And yet there were people, Baruch Hashem, some are very much with us, some are not with us anymore, who looked at the choshech, and instead of simply saying, I give up, they said, I'm going to try to light a light. Now, by Chanukah as well, they may have had the attitude, we only have light for one day. What's the tachlis of lighting for one day? We're not going to have tomorrow tohar light. What's the use of doing something today if tomorrow it's not going to last? But what does Chanukah tell you? I'll be pshat. I'm not giving any fancy chidushim. You have one day, you do what you can, and then the Ribbon Shalom takes over. You don't do what you can, the Ribbon Shalom doesn't take over. You have one day, you light one day, you can reach one person, one Talmud, do it. It's a drop of the ocean. Well, for that drop in the ocean, there's a Hatzalah. Right? Somebody was once gathering starfish who were throwing them back in the ocean. They were washed ashore. So somebody said, what's the tachlis here? There are a million starfish that are going to die. He says, well, at least this one went back into the ocean. This one's going to live. And yet we find, like Chanukah, a person has that emunah in the kayach of Torah, emunah in the light of Torah, emunah in the Ribbon Shalom, emunah in their kaychas, because a person needs emunah in their kaychas. HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes the hishtadlus that it seems to be so ineffectual, and He blesses it beyond what we would have thought possible. Baruch Hashem, there is, of course, much, much, much work to be done. The Avodah is not finished. The final point I want to bring out just very quickly is that Rashi points out again from the Sifri, Ba'aloischa Sanerais. So Rashi says, again from Chazal, that when you light a menorah, when you apply a flame to the candle, the Kohen has to hold it there until there is a heat and a combustion that arises from within the candle itself, meaning as the wick gets hot, the heat will eventually set fire from within and come out. Shal heves ola mi'elaha. This, I think, may have been Rav Mendel's most fundamental insight and contribution. And that is, in raising someone to Yiddishkeit, it is not enough to simply tell a person what to do, give him an instruction, give him an art scroll, give him a translation. Rather, eventually the person should become knowledgeable enough, committed enough, caring enough, that there's a shalheves that comes up within. The goal of all of our chinuch is not to simply take whatever Torah people have and put it on the Talmud, but to enable every Talmud to be a shalheves ayla mi'elaha, to be a mechadesh, to be a person who has self-sufficiency, to be a person who can open up a Gemara or a Rishon or a Shulchan Aruch, even without a translation, and to understand it, to enjoy it, to be able to apply it, to be able to bring their own insights and individuality. This too is nichlal in the vision of the menorah, shal heves ola mi'elaha. So b'kitzer, as we think about the B'tira of an Adam Gadol, again, it is not a time for crying, although those of us that were zochet to know do have much to cry about, and those who weren't zochet to know have what to cry about that they weren't zochet to know. But I think we can learn from the idea that the menorah had to be mechunich b'tahara, that when you set your life's agenda, you set it to live a lechatchila life. Questions come, but the goal has to be not just to be yaitse in your Yiddishkeit, but to live a lechatchila life. Number two, to be creative, to be innovative, to use the totality of your personality, but to do so when it is rooted in the mezuzah biyamin, the Devar Hashem. Number three, to have hope, to be optimistic, to understand that there's much darkness in the world, but there's a Ribbon Shalom that is a Kol Yachol, and within each and every one of us is an Eilam Katan that has a tremendous Kayach. And if we do whatever we're capable of doing, as small as we think that is, if we do our hishtadlus in the world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bless that hishtadlus well beyond what we thought would have been possible. And finally, the goal of self-sufficiency, that each of us should endeavor to become the shalheves ayla mi'elaha. In this way, Reb Mendel continues to be our Rabbi and our guide, inspiring the spirit of Or Sameach together with his wonderful collaborator of almost half a century. And in that way, we'll certainly bring a much, much nachas to our Rosh Yeshiva, but ultimately, of course, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.